Joining us for more on this is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money.
So, people are spending more money.
They are indeed, Emily. Retail sales are up on the month, but they're actually down on last year. Let me explain how those two things can happen at once. So we can have a look at the numbers. Sales volumes were up 0.7% in June on the previous month, on May 2023, but those sales were down 1% on June 2022.
Right.
So there's a sort of gradual slowdown happening. What we saw in June, last month, the month we just had, we saw a bounce back in food sales. Weather was very good. Lots of people having barbecues and so on, having people around celebrating the good weather. Having said that, overall consumer confidence in July, these are unofficial numbers from the GfK consultancy, is actually down. And it seems now that the interest rate rises, fiscal dragging people into higher tax thresholds, less disposable income, the idea that the UK is going to go into recession, which is pretty now almost nailed on, I'd say.
Wow.
And you know what? It's not just a crisis of consumer confidence that we seem to have down the track. It's also a crisis of business confidence, particularly those small businesses that we champion here on GB News. Here indeed is Alan Sodhi of the Federation of Small Businesses.
There is a cost of living crisis affecting consumers, but there is a cost of doing business crisis as well, particularly affecting smaller businesses who don't have the big pockets of big, large global corporates. And that's higher interest rates, it's inflation, it's the highest tax burden for 70 years. The only way out of that is to ease some of that burden, to have policies in place from government and from others that actually allow these businesses to have more of the money that they take to spend, to invest, to grow, to create jobs, and ultimately to get back economic recovery.
Well, some hope of recovery there, but I suppose it is interesting. On the one hand, there's sort of tightening going on with interest rate rises, but the government is still borrowing a lot of money every year.
The government's borrowing a huge amount. Just on the Federation of Small Business they're really looking to see what happens, as indeed much of the business world is, and indeed many mortgage holders, what happens on the 3rd of August. That's when the Bank of England next will make an interest rate move or not, its next decision. There is now a genuine debate about whether or not rates should go up, given that inflation was a bit lower earlier this week, 7.9% now during the year to June. So I think that's a really, really interesting sort of moment in British economic policy making. And as you say, Tom, the government is still borrowing like Billio. In June, the British state borrowed £18.5 billion in June alone. That's the equivalent, you know, if you think like 6 billion quid is a penny on income tax, that's like the revenue that you get from 3p on the basic rate of income tax. They borrowed all of that. Wow. That's slightly less than in June 2022, not £400 million less than in June 2022, but it's still the third highest June total on record. And get this, for me, this really exposes why it's so grotesque that the government's borrowing so much money. Because of the £18.5 billion that we borrowed in June, £12.5 billion of it went on debt interest payments, paying the interest on previous debt.
That's almost all of the borrowing we did, or at least the majority of the borrowing we did in June is going on paying for the borrowing we're doing.
But of course, it doesn't stop the political media class saying instantly, we're borrowing slightly less than we thought we were going to borrow, so now we can cut taxes. I mean, it's just... It's circular thinking. Look, I want to see lower taxes, I absolutely do. But you've got to cut taxes because you believe that tax cuts are going to lead to more growth, which solves borrowing there. Don't cut taxes because we're paying slightly less. Yeah. We're borrowing slightly less than the OBR said we were going to be borrowing.
There does seem to be a very popular view, unsurprisingly, that we could just continue to borrow as much as we like forever and a day. Let us know what you think about that.
Yes, gbviews@gbnews.com. Liam, thank you so much for bringing us those latest, slightly worrying statistics, and the good news mixed in there with the pretty depressing.
A little bit of a glimmer of hope, although Liam said a recession is very much, well, odds on.
Yeah, odds on, goodness me.